Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Dashat Company versus JSA Shindenbutai and the scenario is Firefight. Now today's battle report challenge comes courtesy of channel supporter Kev. Kev, always great to hear from you. Kev has requested one of two things. One of the things he proposed was a battle report featuring Dashat Company motorized bounty hunters, but that was on the assumption that they are currently correctly stated, and I don't think that they are. Those of you who jump into Dashat Company in Army will see that motorized bounty hunters in Dashat Company right now don't have the limited or no cover rules. That's probably a mistake in exactly the same way that the combined Army Libertos was using the old N4 profile for a while. So, the second request that Kev made was with regards to Uragan tractor mules. And so that's what we'll be playing with today. Let's have a look at the list. Now, if I was a chicken shit coward, I could probably have gotten away with just sliding a single tractor mule into this list with the Uragan weapon profile and being like, this is fine, this is meeting the challenge, I'll just put it in a corner somewhere and never mind. But we're actually running two of them today, firstly to properly put them through their paces, but actually there is some rationale to this madness. Now, there are a couple of things that these tractor mules do that make them a little more interesting than I had really initially given them credit for in N5, mostly off the back of the fact that they were not very good in N4. And in N4 especially, they were very much prisoners to their range bands. They had just garbage range bands. They were only good from, I think, 8 to 16 inches. Yes, they had total reaction, burst 3, etc. Very hard to make a model work when their range bands are that restricted. Their range bands have changed in N5 to not actually Spitfire, but Red Fury range bands, which means that they are good from 8 to 24, but they then maintain a zero range band all the way out to 40 inches. And I have been playing with things like the Shihab Total Reaction bot and similar, that's the Hack Islam version, but other Total Reaction bots in other factions, with the Thunderbolt profile recently, and I have been finding that I have been really liking it in every game. Those weapons are usually, like those Total Reaction bots are usually about 18 points and 0 SWC, and they have been doing good work for me, firstly just as a defensive piece, right? You want some defensive pieces in your list, it's a decent one, it can be recovered quite easily with an engineer. But in particular, those Thunderbolt profiles are kind of useful because they have flare-back range bands, which means that you can put them very far back, and they enable you to have that zero range band out a very long way, which gives you at least the option of hopefully putting an enemy HMG in their -3 range band, and having a more awkward face-to-face roll for your opponent than your opponent might like, basically forcing a face-to-face roll in which nobody is likely to succeed particularly much, which works well for you as the reactive player. Now, in comparison to Shihabs, which I have been enjoying, Uragan tractor mules have some advantages and some disadvantages. The disadvantages obviously are, firstly, it costs one entire SWC, whereas a total reaction bot with Thunderbolt costs nothing, generally speaking. Secondly, it doesn't quite have the same range bands. The Thunderbolt has HMG or flareback range bands where it's good from 16 to 32, whereas the Tractor Mule is good from 8 to 24, and then it's 0 from that point. That means you can do a little bit more if you wanted to push the Tractor Mule forward, or like there are range bands you can watch at close range that you couldn't with a Shihab. But it does mean that if you try and position a tractor mule like a Shihab, you have to be very, very judicious with its positioning, because you don't, like if you're watching a long range band with that thing, you will inevitably put yourself at risk of being ranged in by a HMG in their good range band. It's difficult to guarantee. Once you're going for those long range shots, it is difficult to guarantee you will catch an enemy HMG at long range. And if the Shihab tries to do that and fails, well, it's still fighting at a +3. Whereas the Tractor Mule tries to do that and fails, it's fighting at a 0 range band. It's very, very likely to lose. But as a comparison, it does have that better shorter range bands, and it's a full 4 points cheaper. Yes, there's one SWC, but 14 points is significantly less than 18 points. On top of that, although it's 1 point ballistic skill lower, its face-to-face rolls are actually very, very similar because it has 2 points of armor, and if the Uragan actually hits, it's much more dangerous. It's a template weapon that is shock and armor piercing, which is considerably better than just the Thunderbolt hitting you with a bullet. And on top of that, the final piece in this particular puzzle is that they have guided. And this is a list that wants to make ample use of guided because, and I'll explain how Dashat Company I've been playing them in N5 so far, Dashat Company likes to make use of guided, and since I've had to put these into the list anyway, they're a little scuffed by the standards of guided models. But there's two of them, and if I'm just going after stuff in the midfield, trying to clear them off, it'll do the trick. It's enough. It's certainly considerably worse than a proper explosive guided missile attack. It's lower ballistic skill, the range bands are a little bit more awkward, but because I have two of them, I can have longer coverage, which means that my good range band envelope for guided is actually still pretty good with this list. It's kind of workable. And so those pieces collectively are like, you know what? We'll give this a shot. Let's see how not just one but two Uragun tractor mules actually goes. The rest of the Dashat list, I've basically taken those tractor mules and crammed them into what is approximately the Dashat company shell that I have come to really like in N5. And this is a very materiel forward kind of list. And as I go through, I'll just list off the troops and then explain what it's trying to do. So in Combat Group 1, we have Marguerite Brigade with Mine Dispenser. Actually quite a good profile now at 71 points. A 4-person link of a Ghulam Lieutenant, a Ghulam Doctor, Valeria Gromos, and Miranda Ashcroft. Now, this list does not have a Ghulam decoy. If you play it and you're inclined to do so, just find a way. There'd be a way somehow, even if we start by, for example, cutting one of those tractor mules. Consider getting a Ghulam Lieutenant decoy in there, a regular Ghulam with rifle. It is a consistent risk that I keep choosing to run and I should probably stop doing. But in this case, just for the purposes of having the troop slots that we need, we've got that in this list. So it's just one Ghulam Lieutenant. He hides out with the link, giving the link bonuses, because this link does not want to move forward. This is purely a utility link, right? The Doctor is there to heal if things need to be healed. The Lieutenant is there because you need two Ghulams. And after that, what we're doing is we are giving Valeria Gromos the burst bonus, or the special dice bonus to her pitches, and Miranda Ashcroft the special dice bonus to her emitter. Ashcroft is a long-range bricking machine. She will engage almost anything at long range if she particularly wants to, like anything other than maybe a Mora or Queen Gao, right? Like I probably don't want to fight Queen Gao with her, but basically anything else, just have a go. She's hugely accurate, she's got high burst, and she's firing electromagnetic rounds, and she has Mimetism 6. But most of what we're doing with this list is having Valeria Gromos just yeet pitches into the midfield, and that will form a theme which we will get to as we go through. We then have the first of two Monstruckers. This one doesn't have a friend, it's just a Monstrucker, but it is the wonderful 15-point Monstrucker with drop bears and an armed turret with AP rifle. We then have two Libertos. One of them is a mine layer, one of them is not. The one that is not a mine layer will be hanging out next to the Zencha, which is the next model. This is the hacking device with Trinity Zencha. So that Libertos will kind of look like, that Libertos and Zencha can be made to look like a Libertos mine layer. A Fanus remote, the only Autobot in this entire list. Then Combat Group 2, we have a Ludwan. Now, I'm on record over the course of much of N4 as saying that Ludwans are a little bit janky, but could absolutely be used. Happily, in N5, they're just good on their own merits now. They don't have Hollow Mask anymore, so all of the jank about like, oh, pretend them to be 3 different Evo hackers, like all of that stuff, right? That you would inevitably get people who wouldn't really understand how those rules worked, it just doesn't happen anymore. The Lud one is just the Lud one, your opponent knows what it is as soon as it deploys, but it still has Hollow Projector, Hollow Echo, and it has an MSV1, and it has a Burst 3 Thunderbolt, and this other stuff, and it's 20 points. And I have 2 engineers in this list, and I don't have the SWC for any other guns, so it's a good fit. We then have the 2 Tractor Mule Oragons, then a second Monstrucker, this one has a Nazmat, and then just a Ghulam Hacker with hacking device just for a bit more hacking redundancy. Now, how this list plays, and how I play Dashat Company in N5 in at least one list archetype, is to basically just spew disposable material out everywhere, not engage my opponent directly at all, and make all of this crap that I've just thrown into the midfield my opponent's problem, and then reload everything for free, because there are 3 baggage pieces in this list. So in any given turn, what will generally happen is that Gromos will fire out 1 or 2 pitches, the Magariba will fire out a pair of mines, both Monstruckers will deploy their turrets, and then that's just with like 1 or 2 orders on the link, the tactical awareness on the Magariba, and the irregulars on the Monstruckers. And in the States phase, everything reloads for free. And it is just this, provided you buy that first turn, provided you get that first turn, once the wall of material goes up, your opponent has to start killing the pitches, and your opponent has to deal with the mines, and your opponent has to deal with the turrets, and then you just do it all again. It is a wonderful material-based way of fighting. It's not first order, it's not optimal, right? It's not super, super powerful, but it is pretty good, and it is fun to play with, and it's interesting, and seeing how it changes the game up until my opponents start learning how to really make good use of deactivators. For example, it's very cool. Now, to make a process like that, to make an attack or a defensive structure like that work, you have to make it so that your opponent is incentivized to come and attack you, which means you want asymmetric ways of attacking your opponent. And yes, we can poke and prod with things like the Libertos, but what we're going to be doing is a fair bit of guided play. Because I don't want to run at my opponent, I want my opponent to have to run at me, because I've thrown up mines and turrets and repeaters. I've made it annoying for and I've got 2 total reaction bots in this list. I want my opponent to have to come into me, and so what we do is we just throw missiles at them to make it very annoying to have to engage us. They have to come to us because we haven't left our deployment zone behind the wall of turrets. And Dashat Company, as far as I can tell, is probably one of the best factions at doing this. Firstly, because if you're going to play that kind of game, you have to have a plan for surviving if you don't go first. If you go first, fantastic. You get your turrets out before your opponent goes, your defenses are all in place, the game plan just operates very, very functionally. You do need to walk the turrets forward over the course of the game because your opponent will be going second, they'll have the last play at any scenario. And so a non-Uragan focused, more sensible version of this list includes things like, for example, maybe the 15-point Hunzerkuts, just to do things like grab supply boxes in supplies, for example. But if you are not going first, you need a plan to survive. And so the plans to survive include things like total reaction bots and Libertos, and those like doing some defensive hacking, and even the Mega Reaver as an ARO piece if you absolutely need to. You just need to be able to do that thing that you do, that I'm getting used to doing in N5, which is buying yourself a first turn. And once you've bought yourself the first turn, the turrets go up, the mines go out, the repeaters go up, things are pretty hunky-dory. So I have been enjoying that as a Dashat playstyle. I think Dashat do it probably better than anyone else. Probably better than Panoceania, even though yes, you can have like fireflies coordinating everywhere. The cost of doing it in basically any other faction that's trying to spew out turrets is higher. It's either higher in orders because you have to start reloading manually during your turn, or it's much higher in terms of points cost because there is nothing really in the game that competes with multiple 15-point monstruckers with armor-piercing turrets. So, this is a cool list. Let's see what we're playing against. Now, this is my opponent, Matty's JSA Shindenbutai list, and kind of full disclosure, I may have written this list for Matty. Matty is a returning player. He and his son Joey are playing Infinity N5. Matty played in N4 before being like one of many players, sort of just lapsed out of the game a little bit over the course of N5. N4, he's back in N5. It's very good to see him again, but he was like, I need some Shindenbutai lists. So I've written him a variety of lists. This is the one that he chose to play today. This is a Shindenbutai list. It does lean very heavily into asymmetric play, but I think it makes good use of some of what I consider to be Shindenbutai's serious strengths. And by Shindenbutai's serious strengths, I mean those first 3 models right there is like one of my favorite teams in the game right now. This is a Rushi, either profile, and a Tanuki, and then a Shizoku F tier. Now, you do not necessarily need to have the Shizoku because you only have one Harry's team in Shindenbutai, and I think you can't core with this team. This is a Seo, probably mispronouncing that, team. Yes, there are some good list names you can write with that, by the way. But this is a team, the Shizoku is nice to have. Like, it's just a very good samurai for very, very cheap. If you take the Shizoku out, just a duo of these guys is some of the highest condensed utility, I think, in the game for 2 models and 42, 43 points. So the Rushi gunfights, right? It's an MSV2, you have smoke in this list. Not a lot of smoke, obviously, but you have smoke in the form of your Jimbo. You can give it support where it's a perfectly able gunfighter for middleweight gunfighting. And it gets +1 special dice because it's a pure team with the Tanuki. The Tanuki, provided you just have something to give her a link bonus, just kind of does every piece of utility that you might hope for. She's a very serviceable generic hacker. I think willpower 13 and the BTS is high. It might be like 3 or 6. 3, I think. But she's good at dodging, and she's a warhorse, which means she can't be isolated. And she's got a pitcher and a disco baller with a serviceable ballistic skill, which both of those benefit from link teams. So in one link, you have the Rushi, who is a repeater and a gunfighter, and the Tanuki, who is giving you visibility controls with a disco baller, repeater projection with the pitcher, and a serviceable hacker, and a specialist. And that is just collectively a great pairing, like super high utility for just 2 models. And we can staple a Shizoku, and Shizoku are, yes, they have Frenzy, but they're excellent. Like the Shizoku can be effectively burst 4 with that heavy rocket launcher, and it's durable, and it's dangerous. It's incredibly good close assault combatant. You may as well staple a Shizoku into a list, and in fact, in another version of this list, we have just a free-running Shizoku because I think they're excellent troops. So just that as a starting point, this is some of the stuff that I really, really like in JSA Shindenbutai. We then have some of the other things that I like in JSA Shindenbutai, which is a pair of Yamabushi, and a Kyojin Killer. The Kyojin Killer being a regular is like, yeah, we can't take 3 Yamabushis, but the Kyojin is also still very, very good, and Yamabushi are excellent. I think we're running 2 different Yamabushi. I think both of them actually were just Panzerfaust. I may have just accidentally added 2 of the wrong ones to this list. But you just Panzerfausts are typically what you'll take. The main thing is they're there for regular orders, dogged, defense, chain rifle, heavy pistol, forks, great close combat. They're just outstanding models. The Kyojin Killer is mostly we can't have a 3rd Yamabushi. We then have Yojimbo, 20 points, still a pretty good buy. The Contender is a better range piece than it was before. Smoke grenades going down in range bands did hurt Yojimbo, but for 20 points, there's only so much you can ask for. We then have a missile bot, because there is a bunch of hacking in this list, and a Ninja KHD. One of the things Shindenbutai is lacking is easy access to high-quality Trinity hackers. There really just isn't that much. You want a marker state if you can get it, and your overall choices for KHTs are just kind of limited. I don't want to take a drop troop just as a KHT trooper, even if the Tenshin Guntai or whatever it's called is a reasonable killer hacker. I'm not paying, I think it's like 21 points just for the KHD if I'm not going, like having to have it off the table. And that really just leaves us with either the Nokaziru unit or the I think it's just or the ninja. And the Nokaziru unit is like the platonic ideal of not what you want in a killer hacker. Firstly, it's more expensive than the ninja. And secondly, it is exactly that kind of piece that is packing all of this equipment that's like, oh, it's mimetism and MSV1 and forward deployment. And if you are a killer hacker without a marker state, you just give your opponent an attack vector against you that lets them ignore all of your stuff. So just the Ninja KHD, I think, is probably unless I've missed one, is probably the only like actually good at doing what you want a KHD to do. And you want a KHD in a list like this because you have so much repeater projection. So the Ninja is there. The Ninja is by no means bad. 25 points for what you get on the Ninja is a pretty efficient kind of pure profile, but it would really round the faction out as an infowar slash utility slash tech faction to have something like, for example, an off-brand interventor killer hacker. In Combat Group 2, we have the Garon Total Reaction Bot. It has a Mark 12 rather than a +1 burst Thunderbolt. I think it is absolutely worse than the Thunderbolt ones. It's more expensive, and the Mark 12 isn't a profile. Like, the range bands are just a bit more awkward. But we don't have the Thunderbolt in JSA. We have the Mark 12 instead, and there's no SWC spare in this list. We then have a duo, Rushi and Tanuki, doing all of the same things as the first combat group, but it's in a little bit more of a lean profile. It's just a duo, it doesn't have the Shizoku. Then we have a Monstrucker and a Yao Sao. Oh look, Rob has put a Monstrucker with an AP rifle and drop bears in yet another list. We do have baggage in this list, so the Monstrucker could choose to hang out by the Evo and build its own little defensive network, but because there are multiple Rushis in this list, it really is there to be an engineer. The fact that it has that turret and all of that other stuff is just kind of like nice to have. It is there to do engineer things because you want to do engineer things in this list. So overall, this is a very close range, close assault. Like there really isn't a part. The rocket launcher, the Shizuku, can fight at long range, and it will if it has to. Mimetism, etc. But most of what this list wants to do is to control visibility with its disco balls, to get in range and make good range attacks with the Rushi, and to close assault as needed. It wants to fire off guided missiles, wants to do all of that annoying info war play. It wants to engage symmetrically only very sparingly, and otherwise do the mission, do all of the things that you want to do to win the game. It's that kind of asymmetric tech list, and it's pretty good at doing that. So those are our 2 lists. We're jumping into Firefight. Let's see how the game went. Now, this is actually Maddie's table that we're playing on, and if you look at this, you may go, oh, there appear to be some smoke grenades on the table already. You've left them there accidentally. No, in fact, we haven't. This is something that we workshopped out ahead of the game, and these are visibility zones that will be present. Now, this was a bit of an experiment. What I've suggested Maddie actually do is he go and get like some pictures of crowds. You can actually get little like cartoon pictures of like a whole bunch of people, and make up like crowd templates. Treat them just as eclipse. Orders are from command that you're not to fire through the civilians. But to put those in, so what we're actually playing with is there are 3 static and permanent eclipse zones on this table, and that's very necessary because we've been playing a couple of games on this table, and this table has some issues if you don't put things like that in there. Because these buildings are very like physically large, but not necessarily easy to get into or out of, we playing these square sections off these. So if you look at this building hill, for example, you can see this is an elevator. If you just walk onto that and use a move action, you can end up at ground level. So they're not too hard to get onto or off, but they just occupy a very large amount of space. But their ground level footprint is actually not that much because they have all of these balconies and stuff. So the actual footprint of the building is not really as large as you would think. So you tend to, with this kind of this kind of terrain, it looks like there's a lot of terrain, but there is just so much empty space on the ground. Add in the monorail, and you have a very similar thing. The monorail is super awesome looking. It's very impressive. It's really high up, and there is like no line of fire at all blocked underneath those tracks, despite the fact that it uses up a lot of space. And so we have all of this cool potential. Like the buildings look really, really cool, but what we need to do is just add in that kind of essential stuff you need in an Infinity game, which is the ability to actually move around the table. And so one of the experiments that we've conducted, and which I think has worked really well, and I really enjoyed this game, is 3 static and permanent eclipse zones. So the first one you can't see, but it is between these 2 buildings here. The 2 buildings in the midfield have an eclipse zone in between them, like a crowd of people, which means that they can be moved through, but they fully block line of sight through the midfield. Now, it's only a portion of the midfield. You can still easily see around them, but then there are 2 more eclipse zones off-center from the centralmost building. They are doing a similar thing. You can thread lines between them. So for example, from the rooftop in my deployment zone, I can see a narrow line down through toward Maddie's deployment zone, and I can see, enfilading fire or crossfire toward the approaches toward my own deployment zone. But I can't bracket everything in. No one position in my deployment zone can bracket Matty's deployment zone, and vice versa. And that's what we want from an Infinity table. We want ARO pieces to be relevant, but not just something that has to be engaged with or the game doesn't get to be played. I really liked how they played, but they are going to impact play. So, Maddie tragically has won the role to go first, and he has chosen to go first because it's Firefight. And I did mention that my list loves to go first because I can just start throwing turrets out. Alas, not in this particular case. Maddie's going to have the first bite of the cherry, and he sets up very aggressively. He's basically more or less on the 16-inch deployment zones with quite a few things. So we can see the first of 3 camouflage markers, and we'll just do this after everything. This strategic deployment, I think, was a couple of camouflage markers. Can't quite remember, but the first Yamabushi has deployed down here. The next one is hanging out almost like on about the 20-inch line, and then the Nokozaru is almost in, because it can deploy a bit further forward, it's almost in the zero visibility, or the eclipse zone between these 2 buildings. And then we have 2 Tanuki teams, so the smaller 2-person Tanuki team is hanging out behind this monorail girder and the zero visibility, or the eclipse zone, and then the 3-person team quite aggressively deployed to push forward behind this food cart that can it can walk out a couple of different directions to potentially move through and assault my deployment zone. Yojimbo is hanging out behind a food cart that's in Maddie's deployment zone. And then basically everything else is pulled fairly far back. We do have the total reaction bot deployed a little bit aggressively, a bit far forward. It's watching maybe sort of like a third of the table. I actually will forget that it's there for a couple of turns before finally just engaging and destroying the Magariba. The lieutenant, the holo projector lieutenant, is hanging out or decoy lieutenant, holo projector, I think it's holo projector, hanging out way on the back table edge. Very difficult for me to have a crack at, even though it's nominally a telegraph lieutenant. It's going to be very hard to get over there. Distance is the greatest protector, and then the missile bot and the Evo hacker are just sort of deployed behind buildings in the deployment zone. My deployment has been quite challenging because I have to survive, and I'm trying to make use of these Uragan total reaction bots. And so what we're doing here is actually attempting to make use of the Spitfire range bands that they offer us. So on each of these there's 3 large buildings in my deployment zone. 2 of them have Uragans on them. So it's this Uragan here and then this Uragan here. And so these are 2-story buildings. The buildings in the middle of the table are 3-story, and then there's 2-story buildings in Maddie's deployment zone, which means that really the Uragans are only going to be able to see down into the midfield because there's line of fire otherwise kind of blocked off, and onto those rooftops. So they're using their shorter range bands to good effect. But if Maddie was to move anything out through this open space here, it would attract fire from everything in my entire army, basically. Multiple total reaction bots at 0 range band. So what I'm encouraging Maddie to do basically is to push in through the close assault function, where I have more of my mines and more of my midfield, and I'll still be getting good use of the Uragan's range bands. We then have our camouflage markers all deployed in the midfield. One of the Libertos mine layer is on this roof, and then it's got a mine hanging out down underneath this building, ready to detonate on anything that comes through the eclipse smoke. And then pretending to be a Libertos mine layer, at ground level underneath this building, we have a standing Libertos submachine gun and chain colt, and prone on a balcony, we have the Zencha hacker. And what I'm kind of hoping is that maybe I'll have the opportunity to do something sneaky in ARO with the hacker, but I'm aware of how much hacking there is in Maddie's this list, so we're going to be very careful about that. The Gulam infantry team is deployed on balconies and the rooftop of this building. We have Monstruckers kind of hanging out on balconies or ladders on each of the two buildings supporting the total reaction bots. We have the prone Fanus remote on this balcony in front of the second or the first Uragan. It's there to project kind of just a little bit of a hacking radius in case the hackable infantry and Rushi push in around this direction towards my deployment zone. And then the Ludwan and its Hollow Echoes and the Gulam Hacker are all hanging out in the bottom left of my deployment zone. I've put the Ludwan in like a couple of fake out positions that are kind of like this one on the rooftop. Please ignore that that's a Kum Rider. Pretend that it's a Ludwan. I only own one Ludwan model. It needs to be treated as real, even though the reasonable guess is that it's not. I've got one hanging out down behind this plane, and then one on ground level behind the building. The ground level one is the real one because there's a Monstrucker Helper bot near it. Kind of telegraphed. I could have chosen not to do that, but in the end, it was just like, let's just be sensible. Let's not double think this. Finally, the Magari Brigade is hanging out in contact with this building. She's actually so tall that she's touching the second story and benefiting cover from that while seeing underneath it. That might come back to bite me, but she's a big, heavy model, and Matty doesn't actually have a ton of ways to deal with a full-on tag in his list, short of close combat, which he'll do excellently against a tag if he gets into close combat, or with hacking. So Matty begins his first turn, and his approach basically is to adopt the bane of total reaction bots everywhere, which is smoke shooting. It's an excellent solution, and he does it well. It takes a couple of orders for your Jimbo to get smoked down, basically behind this building over here, but once he has that smoke down, I got no MSVs, and so the Rushi Spitfire with MSV2 just moves up through the smoke and begins taking fights. Now, it takes a fair bit of time. This is still a time-intensive process, because the Rushi just has a Spitfire. I've got Armor 2 models. We have one occasion where he hits me, and I spang the rolls because I've got good armor, or good-ish armor. We've got one occasion where we each crit. This just goes back and forth, and after a couple of face-to-face rolls, but kind of slightly more time than Matty would like to spend, he does eventually put down the Uragan on this rooftop. Now, quick note, I have chosen to call down a speedball but not strip orders from either of Matty's groups. I will then forget to use the speedball for the entire game. That's the first game that I've done that, but I have consistently forgotten that it exists as a rule until turn 2. In this instance, I knew he had counterintelligence. I didn't want to be on only 2 command tokens because there are slightly too many irregulars in this list to go without. I am not 100% sure I really needed the speedball. It's mostly an extra wound for the Magariba if she survives to get it. She's in a really good position to pick up a speedball, which is why I chose that. But frankly, I think I could have just had all 4 orders for things like rerolling mechanic checks and for converting irregular orders regular. Not 100% sure what the right play was here, but in any case, Matty had full bottle of orders across the first turn. So there we go. A bunch of those orders are spent putting fire into the Ludwan. He really only has enough orders to put down 1 because it really is quite time intensive. He did consider pushing further up and around to engage the second of the 2 Uragans, but if he had done that, he would have had to have moved into zone of control of the Fanus, and multiple hacking arrows back would have been very hazardous for the Rushi. So he made the call, take what you can get, put 1 down, but that took something like 4 or 5 or 6 orders to accomplish between, in fact, maybe even more, between 2 orders throwing the smoke, because we couldn't impetuous your Jimbo because there were total reaction bots watching him. So it was multiple orders to lay the smoke, multiple orders to move, multiple orders to take the gunfight. Ultimately, I'm down a 14-point trooper that I will attempt to recover. That's not bad from my perspective. Now, for the rest of Matty's turn, we see a couple of different things that he attempts to push through with. Because he can't use the Rushi to solve for the second Uragan, he uses the Kyojin Killer instead, or he attempts to. The Kyojin Killer just moves out and around, it's forward deployed, moves to the edge of the smoke, and then it moves out of the smoke to see the Uragan, but it's in line of fire of quite a lot of things doing that. The mine that is underneath this building will detonate, the Uragan holds. I do choose to reveal the Ludwan on ground level and take a Thunderbolt shot. I hold with the Ludwan and with the Uragan because the mine has gone off. Okay, the mine goes off. He's like, yep, cool, that's going to hit me. I'll flamethrower the Uragan. The Uragan actually dodges. It doesn't love doing that, but between the mine and the Thunderbolt, I'm comfortable with that as an attempt. And as it happens, the Uragan makes his dodge. I also succeed a Spotlight, which completes Telemetry, the first of 3 classifieds I will be attempting this game, and the mine just happens to kill the Kyojin Killer. So that is a nice free kill. Yes, I've lost a mine. Yes, I've revealed the Ludwan, but it will unreveal itself at the end of this turn. And we've gotten a kill on a reasonably dangerous close assault pace. The rest of Maddie's turn is spent doing tech things with this list, which I think is very cool. So this is where the second team comes into play, and they'll carefully move up and around. They have to lay down a disco baller to be able to move across this gap, move out and around, but they use a disco baller and the existing eclipse zones to just nice and comfortably thread the needle, getting past my Magariba and my standing Uragan total reaction bot, and they hook a pitcher down to just behind this building here. Now, he only has so many orders left at this point. He has not got a ton. And so he contents himself with just going after. He doesn't reveal the ninja. And the reason why he doesn't reveal the ninja is that the ninja is on this rooftop right next to the Libertos, which was not intentional on my part at all, but is very fortunate for me because it means he can't easily bring his killer hacker out. So he just contents himself with going after my Gulam with his Tanuki, firing off Oblivions. It's not a kill, but it's pretty close to a kill. He could potentially, and probably should have, I don't know if the orders he had worked out for this. I think he'd used all of his Combat Group 1 orders at this point, making that run with the Kyojin. But if you are in this position, you may well consider just spotlighting and missiling the hacker instead. Yes, Oblivion is quite effective, but I don't necessarily want to, like, you just get the kill, right? Just spotlight and follow off with a missile if you have enough orders to do so. Now, at this point, don't actually remember that Warhorse is a rule on the Tangukis, so I respond with Oblivion myself. That would have been very embarrassing if I'd won the face-to-face roll, but I don't. And I think after 2 attempts, Oblivion gets through on this Gulam and bricks it, but that's the end of Maddie's turn. So as far as defensive turns go, I really can't be unhappy with that. Like, yes, the repeater that's been landed on in this building here, or behind this building here, is going to be very, very annoying. Yes, the Gulam being turned off is very, very annoying. Yes, the Uragan going down is annoying, but ultimately I've only lost 1 actual model, and I've killed 1 actual model. That's a good defensive first turn, and we're in a pretty good position to, from here, build those defenses, set the defenses up, throw out material, do the Dashat play. Now, to note, in the states phase, there is a effectively jump forward. It's a little bit difficult to see in this clip, and it actually looks like the poor the poor Gulam hacker has been immobilized as well at some point during the turn. This is the repeater that Maddie laid here behind this building. At the end of Maddie's turn, there was a Lewd one here in hacking area. That would kind of unfortunate for me if I wanted to use that Lewd one. Happily, nothing else is looking at the Lewd one, which means that it could Hollow Echo, chaining the Hollow Echoes backwards like that, each of them in base contact with each other, then pick a new one, and the new one that it picked was out of zone of control of the pitcher. Now, at this point, I'm sure someone will be like, the Hollow Echo rules have changed. Let me know if they've changed. I just played it the way that it was. But that is something that happens at the end of Maddie's turn before I jump into my turn, so we'll go back to the previous picture now. So the Lewd one echoes backwards, and I begin my turn. At some point during this turn, I will attempt to have the Gulam reset just because I can, but he's still in zone of control of that repeater, and he gets carbonated for his troubles. That's how he ended up getting carbonated. So he's going to be in rough shape for a fair bit of the rest of the game, but we have plenty of other play that we can attempt to make. And we're going to start by repairing the tractor mule that went down and throwing out just a ton of material. The Monstrokers are going to place a pair of turrets just kind of on building rooftops where they'll be very annoying. The Magariba is going to throw out a pair of mines, both of which will land and will really badly pin the Tanuki team. And the Tanuki team that moved forward towards this smoke hasn't retreated. They're really safe because they're in smoke. They're in a permanent eclipse zone, but I can throw mines at that permanent eclipse zone. I end up actually having one of the mines touch just a point just outside, so that the mine itself is inside the eclipse zone, but I just bracket the Tanuki team in, and that's going to be a problem for Maddie on his next turn. We also recover the Uragan that's gone down, take some orders, but we get it back, which means that we are still at this point at full effectiveness. The only real casualty we sustain this turn is that the Monstrucker that is on this building, unfortunately, is the one that has the Helper bot down here helping out the Lewd one, and that Helper bot has not been able to escape the zone of control of the repeater. So it gets isolated and therefore effectively turned off. That's the only real casualty that we sustain this turn. Otherwise, we're going to do pitcher and hacker thing, because it's what the list is built for, and we're going to get some pitchers down behind this building in order to deal with the Tanuki team that is hanging out on the other side of this building. At that point, I will reveal and surprise attack with the Zencha, and this is going to take a little while, but we will get there. And so, kind of comedy of error levels, but multiple orders later, we put down the Tanuki behind that building. Then we spend the Libertos around to deal with the Rushi, and it's the same deal. It's kind of comedy of errors level stuff, but after multiple orders, it is eventually able to put the Rushi down, and then move up and around and threaten a chain cult over this Yamabushi, which forces the Yamabushi to dodge. I shoot the Yamabushi with my submachine gun, And 5 orders later, the Yamabushi is dead. And I am dogged. But I do kill the Yamabushi. It just takes like five orders, maybe like 4 or 5 orders. It's pretty rough, but a kill is a kill. So we lose the Libertos, we lose effectively the helper bot, but we get the Rushi, the Tanuki, the Yamabushi, and we throw out turrets, and we throw out mines, and we recover the Uragan. We've done 1 classified, Maddie hasn't done any. We are in basically a fairly solid position, except I made 1.5 mistakes this turn. The first mistake that I made is that I forgot that I hadn't stripped orders from Maddie. I took that command token out of my pool, thinking that I didn't have it, and I had the command token for the. I took the command token out for the speedball, and I converted one irregular order, and I had to re-roll to recover this Uragan, which means that although I actually would have had 1 command token, I certainly thought I didn't, and we played as though I had none. And no command tokens is a challenging position to be in when you have a tag. Now, ultimately, Maddie didn't see this line of play. He was kind of focused on just how does he attack me conventionally, and that's not something the list really wants to be doing, particularly if the Shizuku is sort of like now no longer in a link. He was concerned about these mines and how he might deal with those. He felt that he was kind of bracketed in by all of these defenses that I had built, when he wasn't necessarily. And so the play that he ended up making was to pull the Tanuki and the Rushi back, trigger the mines, and kind of like dodge. The Rushi went down, the Tanuki was fine because it dodges quite well. And then sort of just flounder a bit with things, not really knowing what to do. He ended up, it was a good line of play actually. We talked through what he could accomplish, and what we settled on in the end was, yep, okay, sure, the Tanuki's pull back, loses the Rushi, but the Tanuki is fine. The Ninja then appears on the rooftop here. Now, we have to sort of rewind this into it again because the Libertos appears. The first thing he tries is that the Ninja reveals to discover the Libertos. So the Libertos just lays a mine, and then the Ninja fires its pistol, doesn't kill the Libertos, and then there's a mine standing there. Okay, back that one up. How do we actually accomplish this? The Ninja appears and moves forward to be quite close to the Libertos. The Libertos then holds. Ninja does nothing with its second order. Second short skill. The Ninja then activates and declares Discover, to which the Libertos responds by placing a mine, and then the Ninja just moves into close combat. Ninja kills the Libertos in close combat, then activates again and dodges the mine. Now, that's the risky bit. Ideally, something else would have dealt with that mine, but really, Ninja just crawls into CC and stabs the damn thing. I think it takes all of 2 orders to do that. Gets the comfortable kill on the Libertos, dodges the mine, then moves forward again with that dodge to get in zone of control of the Zencha. Now, Zencha versus Ninja in the Ninja's active turn with no firewalls present is kind of a back and forth face-to-face roll. The Zencha only has 1 dice, whereas the Ninja obviously has 3. They're just trinitying each other. But the Zencha is much more durable. It's got a lot of BTS and it's got multiple wounds. And what basically happens is that they just zout at each other for like 2 orders before the Ninja hits 3 times and the Zencha whiffs on 16s, and the Zencha just goes all the way to dead, which is very sad, but it is what it is, and the Ninja is therefore just Ninja, cool, Ninja now safe on rooftop, mine disabled. Now, all told, that isn't a bad use of the turn. It is not probably what I would have done. What I would have done is probably spent one of the available pieces, even if it's your Jimbo, to just whoop through this smoke here and trigger both mines. Just trigger the mines from behind. Just make them detonate backwards away from the Tanuki team and Rushi, so that the Tanuki team and Rushi are free and have their link bonuses intact. The Tanuki can then just lean out around the smoke and fire pitches down here, and it can then just go ahead and firstly Oblivion Valyria Gromos or kill Valyria Gromos with the Ninja, and then straight up possess the tag. And once the tag is possessed, remembering that I have miscounted my command tokens and we are playing that as the game state, that's real bad. It's very difficult to deal with that as a problem. And the lesson that I need to remember there is just don't ever spend your last command token. I thought I had 1 command token left, 2 command tokens left when I chose to convert an irregular order regular and then reroll on the Uragan. I did not need to do necessarily either of those. I could have saved one of them. I could have just accepted my losses at one certain point. Do not, if you are not very confident in your ability to manually repossess the tag, do not have your tag sitting around against enemy hackers with pitches if you have 0 command tokens left. So that was actually multiple unforced errors, one of which cancelled out the others, but ignoring that, I need to remember that if I'm playing the Magariba against good enemy info war, just don't ever let it be possessed. Now, that didn't happen, but it was a line of play that could and probably should have been pursued because it would really have led to good outcomes. The only other thing that has happened this turn that is of note is that with all of this, like this little repeater down here is still present, with all of these enemies just running around, this Ghulam hacker who has had all of his hacking equipment turned off has just had multiple attempts to reset, and it actually does it. The Ghulam hacker will eventually clear Spotlight and Carbonite. I think it rolls a 1 on a reset eventually. It needs a 2. But that is a nice little upside as a result of this turn. Now, going into my second turn, all of my defenses are still up, but I'm being attacked asymmetrically. And we can kind of see here, like, yeah, okay, I've thrown a whole bunch of turrets and mines forward. The mines were really useful. The turrets didn't do anything. And that's going to happen from time to time in different games. Turrets are going to be of variable utility, but given that they are very easy to place, I'm happy to place them in this particular game. Now, I am going to suffer a little bit as a result of the Zensha being dead. The other classifiers that I have can kind of, like, I've got Sabotage, and she's the only model with decharges. But ultimately, the game is in basically a solid place because Matty has just continued to throw himself at my defenses, and my defenses have mostly held. I have pretty close to the same amount of overall troops that I have this turn that I went into the last turn. Yes, I've lost a Libertos, yes, I've lost a Zensha, but otherwise we're in reasonable shape, and Matty has continued to sustain attrition dealing with my various different pieces. And so the main thing that we will do this turn, we no longer have the Zensha Killer Hacker, so we don't have Trinity, but we do have a means of using repeaters to kill enemy hackers, which we will use, which is that Grommo stands up again. We finally both remember that the total reaction bot is here, so I brick it with Miranda, who puts it on -12, and then the Mega Reaper just kills it in one order. Probably should have done that like 2 turns ago, but we just both forgot that it was there because the line of sight of the human was blocked by the big tram car here. So deal with that with Miranda, and then Gromos, who has reloaded previously, throws down some pitches, and we deal with the enemy killer hacker ninja on the roof the classic way, which is that we spotlight it and then fire missiles at it. We have multiple missiles in good range band, so we just, yep, doop, the spotlight, and then drop missiles on his head until he dies. That's the last enemy hacker dealt with. No, we need to deal with the Tanuki team as well, and I'm actually pretty sure we deal with the Tanuki team the same way. I think we throw some mines first, and then go to Spotlight, throw the pitch, like throw some mines, and then throw the pitcher, and then throw the Spotlight, and she has to try and deal with one of those two things. I think she ends up trying to Oblivion through to deal with Gromos, gets killed by the mine, or gets knocked unconscious by the mine. Done, excellent, cool, great shape. And that's the kind of asymmetric material-based play that this list wants to be making, because what it wants to be doing is throwing up a bunch of turrets. And it throws up a bunch more turrets, and we basically, that takes a lot of time because those plays with the pitches and the missiles, particularly the medium quality missiles that the Uragans are low quality, like they're not high danger plays, they're order intensive, but we do it all very cleanly. We really haven't left our deployment zone with more than 1 troop at this particular point, plus the infiltrators, but we bleed off a bit more of Matty's stuff. Importantly, we've now killed all of the hackers. We've Trinity'd 1 to death, and we've killed the other 2 with missiles. And so we pass on into Matty's turn, and he's pretty far out of options at this point. Now, there is technically a play that he can make that could win the game. You do not have reinforced tactical link in Firefight, and he knows who my lieutenant is. It's just that getting there is probably a challenge. He only has so many orders, and there are an awful lot of guns, but he will make the attempt because you never know. And so the Shizuku unit, who has been hanging out basically in this smoke since turn 2 of the game, just frickin' Leroy Jenkins it, moves out of the smoke, and dodges. She fails her dodge, and I think she has to take 13 saves, because there is a Mega Reaper guard, 4 turrets, and 2 Uragan total reaction bots, and most everything hits. And a Shizuku unit is very tough, but it does not survive like 14 saving throws. And that's pretty much the most that Matty can do this turn. Except there is one final line of play that emerges only as a consequence of random chance, and it is a pretty cool one. Yojimbo is still alive. Now, the actual discussion that happens here is that Matty and I talk it out. And he's like, I'm not sure how I can score any more points. This is looking to be pretty grim. Like, yeah, I agree. You may as well open some panoplies. Even if you get just like 1, if I don't get any, that is like 1 point that you will get. You'd go for that in a tournament. Just go for it. Yojimbo's right there. So Yojimbo drives up to the panoply that's behind that yellow building, opens it up, succeeds the roll, rolls a 6. Because I am a digger enjoyer in previous editions, I know exactly what a 6 is. It's grenades. Which means that Matty now has a second line of play on my lieutenant. And so Yojimbo rides back forward to the edge of this eclipse zone. Now he's not able to get inside 8 inches of my LT. My lieutenant is on the stairs of this building here, basically here. Yojimbo can get within 16, but not within 8. Yojimbo is Fizz 14, which means that he is rolling for 5s. But he's got 4 orders to spend, so he goes for it. Because if Maddie gets this kill, then I have more classifieds and more army point kills, but he will have more lieutenants and more buttons pressed, more panoplies opened. And there is really not going to be any way I will be able to get to any panoplies, and there's probably not going to be a way for me to get many more classifieds either. And I have no command tokens, so getting a lieutenant kill at this particular point has a very good chance of, at minimum, throwing the scenario back to a tie, or at least making it a narrow win my way. So hell, he's rolled the grenades. Go for it. And on the first dice roll, he hits on a 1, and I fail both of my dodges. But very tragically, for purposes of this story, I passed both of my saving throws. Now he did need to get basically both kills with that, because right next to the lieutenant on the balcony was the doctor, and if he killed the lieutenant but not the doctor, I would just attempt to roll that 17 and recover the lieutenant, which wouldn't give him those points anymore. So he really needed to kill both. He hit both, and I failed. I hit both, and I failed both dodges, but I passed both saves. He throws 3 more grenades, but none of them hits. He do needs 5, and so what I feel like would have been a very cool and exciting end to Matty's final turn, in fact, is just a barrage of grenades all over the place and does not connect, but it could have. Now, had I been in Lost Lieutenant on my final turn, I think the only thing I could reasonably have done is take this Fanus and jump off of the building. A 6-inch jump down onto ground level would put me in zone of control of Maddie's HVT, which is behind this yellow building, which would give me 1 more classified to Maddie's 0. All of Maddie's were really, really hard to do, which would give me 2 classifieds and more army points killed to Maddie's 1 button pressed and more lieutenants killed. So it would probably have still been a Dashat win, but it would be a very, very narrow one. However, fails on the lieutenant kill. Okay, fine. We've got some orders ourselves to burn, but we can't necessarily get that much further ahead on scenario. We don't have any command tokens left to consolidate groups, because I've kind of overspent them, which has been a mistake that I've made this game. But what we can do is basically take the Magariba and move along this line here to there. This takes like every order that Magariba has. There's an armed turret with armor-piercing rifle on ground level behind this girder that I just have to take shots from for like 3 orders. Now I do drive by the panoply, open it, and pull out immunity armor. And I then proceed to roll an 18 and a 19 on my saves in cover against the frickin' turret. And so I take 2 wounds on the Magariba on this path. At which point, we pause, and I just do some quicker calculations, and I confirm that if the Magariba dies, I will still have more army points on the table than Maddie does. So we continue on. We come around to take a look at the lieutenant that is hanging out, the 3 lieutenant decoys that are hanging out behind this traffic stop here. And because the Maragruba guard has a +1 burst every flamethrower, he's forced to reveal the real one and dodge. I would just hose all of them down. I fire my pistols. I hit once, he fails his dodge, but he passes his save. But it was worth a shot. So end of this game, we've had zero lieutenants killed, but we have an equal number of buttons that have been pressed. I have done 2 classifieds, and I've killed more army points. I also have comfortably more specialist kills at this point, because I have lost, I think, 1 specialist, just the Zencha, and on Maddie's part, I've killed, multiple hackers, etc. So final score, that puts me on 2 points for more specialist kills, 2 points for more army points, and then 2 points for classifieds. I do move up to secure the HVT, which is 6 points, and then Maddie just has, actually, I don't think Maddie has anything, so 6-0 in this particular case. Now, that final score probably shouldn't be given too much particular credence, because, as mentioned, there were a couple of misplays during the middle of the game and potential lines of play that each of us could have pursued differently. I should absolutely have remembered that I had a command token left, but I didn't. And thinking that I didn't have any command tokens left, Maddie should absolutely have gone for the possession play on the Magariba guard. In fact, in general, the list that Maddie had should probably have used a fair bit more asymmetric play, pitches, hacking, missiles, killer hacking, oblivions, carbonites, etc., to deal with just not having to engage into the turrets that I was throwing up. That's one of the ways that you can counter the kind of defensive play that Dashat Company list like this uses, and it's one of the things that Maddie's list is built for, and he used particularly smoke shooting with the Rushis really well on the first turn, but then I got the kill on his Rushi in the second turn. He didn't pull back. He kind of left me things to shave off and just accrue value slowly over the course of multiple turns. Now, that's just a learning experience thing, right? Like, Maddie is coming back to N5. And this is a list that he's got that's a little bit technically complex to play, but I think he'll absolutely get there, and we can see some of the potential that JSA Shindenbutai has using pieces like that. We also didn't really get to see the Shizuku unit really strut its stuff. It could potentially have done quite a bit more than it did, etc. So I think the Shindenbutai list has absolute potential. Of course I do. I helped write it. But so does this Dashat Company list. Now, how do I think the Uragans performed? I don't know if this list is better than just having a regular Shihab total reaction bot and a guided missile and just, more mines in the midfield, etc. You can do other versions of Dashat Company that play very, very similarly and have maybe just sort of like, again, the Shatanaya guided missile remote, which is ballistics of 12 and explosive. There's no risk of it flubbing because it only inflicts one save. The single total reaction bolt with the thunderbolts maybe a little bit more user friendly, but the Euroguns absolutely did work. I made them fit with like this list fits them and it fits Libertos and multiple hackers and multiple long range guns, the Magariba and the Lud one. The Lud one is really doing work in this list, just being present with the Thunderbolt. So I could kind of see playing this list again. Honestly, having now played it, the only thing that I don't have on the Urguns that I wish I did is that I don't have 360 visors, because things like drop troops, like I have played against a lot of drop troops so far this edition. They're much more attractively costed, there's more parachutist deployment zones than ever. I actually kind of want 360 visors. Happily, I have another 360 visor in this list because the Magariba Guard has one, but having a second one is a real luxury in Dashat Company, particularly given I keep choosing to play singular vulnerable lieutenants. I should probably stop doing that as well. So overall, yeah, the Urguns did total reaction bot things and guided missile launcher things. 28 points in 2 SWC. The 2 SWC is a little eye-watering for what you get, but they held. One of them died and then came back. The presence the entire game was meaningful and constricted movement. And in the close, they were part of the absolute barrage of fire that inflicted 14 saving throws in a single volley of arrows against a single model. So yeah, they were pretty okay. I think there will be a learning curve in terms of using them and making use of that Red Fury range band that they have, but I could see myself playing them again. I would also note that in terms of the table experiment, I actually really liked how this played. The eclipse zones are the kind of thing that, if you put this table in a tournament, you will get some complaints from players, but they are the kind of complaints that I think I relish rather than take quite seriously. We've played this table at events without anything like those visibility zones, and we had a couple people come to us and be like, "Yeah, we just had some really really long range shooting, and I couldn't get past Atlanta, and I lost the game." And that was the whole game. And like, yep, that's kind of grim. With those eclipse zones, you're going to get situations where it's like, my opponent put a model that's really good at close combat inside the eclipse, and I could never deal with it. And it's like, yeah, that's super interesting. Definitely have to make sure that the eclipse zones don't, for example, if we're playing Acquisition, that there isn't an eclipse zone over the central console in Acquisition, or indeed in any of the consoles. Probably want to avoid that. But as long as you're careful with placing them, like you wouldn't want zero visibility zones because too many things can see through that. It's too abusive. But Eclipse zones felt super usable and interesting, and because they were passive and permanent, neither player could necessarily get special advantage of them. They were there for both players. You could move through them, but they block line of sight. I would play with something like this again, sparingly, right? Only on tables that need it, but this table does need it because of the shape of those buildings and because of things like the monorail. You need other ways to block line of sight, and it worked really surprisingly well. So yeah, that concludes today's battle report. Some quite experimental lists, particularly in terms of things like the total action bots, some experimental terrain as well, but this was a good time and it was very good to catch up with Maddie. Ultimate game result was a little bit one-sided in terms of score, but there were lines of play that especially Matty could have pursued with an info war list that could potentially have done a great deal of damage, which I think is very interesting and very, very sort of like considering how would you play around, how do you respond to a turret defense list? You go after it with things that don't care about the turrets. Matty's list could do that, just didn't quite thread the needle to see those lines of play. So overall, a great game. Overall, very interesting to try out different pieces, to try out the Euroguns. It would be interesting to play them again, but try and make use of the really, really long part of their range band and see how that performs. A bunch of different options there. As always, hope very much that you've enjoyed this video. If you did and you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel supporter. As a reminder, I take battle report requests and challenges from channel supporters, either via Buy Me a Coffee or on YouTube. Big thanks to everyone who does. It allows me to continue making videos like this. Thank you very much for your support. We will be back this time or thereabouts next week with, I'm not sure, I have got a couple of interesting challenges that I need to pursue in terms of battle reports. There's also some longer form content that I want to make, although this video is getting pretty long, in terms of things like faction focuses and having a look just at how N5 is doing or how I feel about N5 a month in. Any of those is a possibility. Hope you'll tune in and join me again this time next week. Otherwise, as always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.